speaker I want to bring up is Mr. Andrew Bernstein. Just to give you a brief bio. Mr. Andrew Bernstein holds a PhD in philosophy from the Graduate School of City University of New York. He teaches philosophy at SUNY Purchase, which selected him Outstanding Teacher of the Year in 2004. He is also the author of the Capitalist Manifesto. I see the book there. The Historic, Economic, and the Philosophic Case for Laissez-faire, 2005. Objectivism in One Lesson, Introduction to Philosophy of Ayn Rand, 2008. Capitalism Unbound, the Incontestable Moral Case for Individual Rights, the latest one. The latest one is the other one. And the Capitalist Solutions, 2011. Okay, Dr. Bernstein is a contributing editor of the Objective Standard, and he publishes a regular column at Forbes.com. So, please help me welcome Dr. Andrew Bernstein.
Thank you, Shaka. Welcome to Little Mumbai. I'm sorry, to Dallas. I schlepped all these, there's a good New York term, I brought all these books down on the plane with me, so if they are for sale. We'll get to that later. All right. The topic for today is religion versus morality. And this, we're here to plug TOS. This comes right out of the current edition of the Objective Standard. On the morning of September 11, 2001, Mohammed Atta and his minions flew stolen planes into the World Trade Center and the Pentagon, destroying the former and murdering thousands of innocent civilians. What motivated such an atrocity? What filled the murderers with such all-consuming hatred that they were willing to surrender their own lives in order to kill thousands of innocent human beings? The clear answer is that these were religious zealots engaged in holy war with their primordial enemy, the embodiment of the modern secular West, the United States of America. In their evil way, the Islamists provide mankind with some clarity. They remind us of what real religion is and looks like. Not the Christianity or Judaism of the modern West, watered down and diluted by the secular principles of the Renaissance and the Enlightenment, but real faith-based, reason-rejecting, sin-bashing, kill the infidels, old-time religion. The atrocities of 9/11 and other similar terrorist acts by Islamists do not clash with their creed. On the contrary, they are consistent with the essence of religion, not merely of Islam, but religion more broadly, religion as such. This is an all-important lesson that humanity must learn. Religion is hazardous to your health. Unfortunately, conventional views of religion hold just the opposite. Many people believe that religion is the necessary basis of morality, that without belief in God, there can be no ethics, no right and wrong. For example, a character in Dostoevsky's great novel, The Brothers Karamazov, famously expressed this view, quote, "In a world without God, all things become permissible," unquote. In the 21st century, many people still believe this. But the converse is true. A rational, fact-based, life-promoting morality is impossible on religious premises. Religion clashes with every rational principle and factual requirement of a proper life-advancing ethics. A proper ethics, one capable of promoting flourishing human life on earth, requires the utter repudiation of religion, of all its premises, tenets, implications, and consequences. To begin understanding the clash between religion and human life, consider the Dark Ages, the interminable centuries following the fall of Rome in the 5th century AD. The barbarian tribes that overran Rome eventually converted to Christianity, which, in the form of the Catholic Church, became the dominant philosophic and cultural force of medieval Europe. Unlike the essentially secular classical world, or the post-Renaissance modern world, the medieval world zealously embraced religion as the fundamental source of truth and moral guidance. What were the results in human life? The church held what amounted to a theocratic dictatorship. It prescribed doctrine and proscribed free thinking. For centuries, it burned heretics at the stake. The dispute regarding the Trinity is a representative example. The church held that Jesus is God, but distinct from God the Father, nevertheless that God is one. Jesus is God, but distinct from God the Father. Nevertheless, God is one. Now, most of you guys live in Texas, so I don't have to reiterate this to you. Now, this is nonsense. Now, Arius, I mean, logically that just makes no sense. Arius, a 4th century Catholic clergyman, recognized that logically this is nonsense. He and his supporters, of whom there were many, in an attempt to clarify and uphold monotheism, held that God created Jesus. That Jesus, although divine, is not identical to God the Father. After protracted theologic wrangling, church leaders upheld the Trinity, declared the Arian theory a heresy, and killed thousands of its unrepentant supporters. The church's repression of the so-called Manichaean heresy was even worse. Church officials held that God is both all-powerful and all-good. How then can there be evil and destructiveness in his world? Presumably, if God is all-good, he desires to save his children from catastrophe. If he's all-powerful, he's able to do so. Why then do epidemics, volcanoes, and earthquakes, as well as volitionally chosen human evil, afflict God's children? From these premises, the Manichaeans give a plausible answer. God is all good, but not all powerful. He fights evil relentlessly and effectively, but evil has undeniable power in the world. As I like to put it, God is like a cosmic version of Batman. You know, he fights evil relentlessly and effectively, but evil has some power in the world. As Leonard Peacock put it very nicely, he said, God's doing the best he can, but he's got a dirty job. Now, for centuries, the church warred against various iterations of Manichaeanism, killing thousands, burning books, and demanding blind acceptance. Further, the church suppressed the era's leading philosophers. It so effectively burned copies of one of the books by John Scotus Erigena, the 9th century thinker today considered the only original philosopher in the West for 500 years, that not a single copy survived. The church, frustrated by Peter Abelard's conviction that all Christian beliefs were explicable by the method of Aristotelian logic, imposed on this genius, the greatest European thinker in the 1500 years between Aristotle and Thomas Aquinas, imposed on him a decree of perpetual silence and burned some of his writings. Church officials threatened Jean Rosselin, one of Abelard's teachers and a leading 12th century philosopher, with excommunication if he did not recant one of his theories. He recanted. This brief survey of repression could be indefinitely extended. And if you want the source for this material, W.T. Jones, The History of Western Philosophy, the leading book on Western philosophy, Volume 2, The Medieval Mind, or the great American historian Will Durant, Volume 4 of The Story of Civilization, The Age of Faith. You can find the repressive nature of medieval Christianity in abundance. Now, the economic results followed accordingly. Economist Angus Madison reports that Europe showed zero growth in per capita, and Angus Madison is like the philosopher, the economist, of historians. I think certainly one of the leading economic historians. Madison reports that Europe showed zero growth in per capita income for the 1,000 years between 500 and 1500 AD. 1,000 years of zero growth in exactly the period we're discussing. In 1500, average per capita income in Europe stood at approximately an abysmal $215. So less than $1 a day. A lot less. Crushing poverty, the inability during a full millennium to rise out of the ashes of Rome's destruction, was an ongoing tragedy of the theory of religious domination, as was the human life expectancy, which failed to rise out of the 20s. Dogma, superstition, and the pyre stifled the free-thinking human mind, halting philosophic, scientific, medical, and technological progress. The great advances wrought by the leading thinkers of the classical world in philosophy, literature, mathematics, and theoretical science were largely lost in the Western world. Reason, not to be liberated until the Renaissance, was a choked and leashed poodle forced to follow its master of blind faith. Let me give you one example. The Greeks made advances in medicine. Galen, Hippocrates, Galen, were great medical men. Obviously, in the ancient world, nobody knew anything about the germ theory of disease. That remains for posture in the 19th century. But at least the Greeks recognized that disease is a natural phenomenon of a natural world, and they looked for natural causation. During the Middle Ages, disease was often thought of as God's punishment for human sin, and the cure was faith and prayer. Even so great a thinker as St. Augustine, a great philosopher, believed that. Notice how that played out during the bubonic plague, the Black Death of the 14th century, when the European population, Western Europe's population, was decimated by almost a third. Almost a third of the population died in a 3 to 4 year period from bubonic plague, while people were praying and having faith in God as the cure. What's the Latin phrase on this? Res ipsa loquitur. The thing speaks for itself. What was the deepest cause of a cultural decline into the abyss that lasted for almost 1,000 years? Why did the quest for heaven lead to hell on earth? The cause is religion. The reason it led to hell on earth is that religion clashes with every rational requirement of man's earthly life. The first step to understand this is to identify the philosophic essence of religion. The second is to identify the fundamental requirement of human life. And the third is to observe that point for point these two clash irrevocably. Consider each in turn. So we'll start with the philosophic principles of religion, then show the philosophic requirements of human life on earth, and then show that point for point these two clash. The philosophic principles of religion. Religion is an attempt to answer the fundamental philosophic questions of human life. What is the nature of the universe or reality? What is the nature of man? How? By what means do we gain knowledge? What is the good? What is the good society? These are the major questions of philosophy. In metaphysics, the branch of philosophy that studies the nature of the universe taken as a whole, religion asserts the existence of an all-powerful spirit that created and governs the universe. Reality is dualistic, sundered into two dimensions, the natural and the supernatural. The supernatural world, the realm of God, is superior to the natural world in every form. It is the cause of the natural world and thereby the source of law in both physics and morality. Religion's theory of human nature follows directly from its metaphysics. Man is metaphysically bifurcated. Man is a metaphysical biped. He's got a soul emanating from the higher world and a body belonging to this one. Because God is morally superior to man, man's soul, the godlike element in his makeup, is morally superior to the body or to the flesh, which is susceptible to carnal or sinful temptations. The two exist as an unstable mix in inherent moral conflict. The body desiring indulgence of its urges, and the soul seeking to restrain the flesh in accordance with moral guidance from God. Jesus summarizes this point succinctly. The spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. Right? The spirit is willing to embrace God, but the flesh, of course, is morally weak. Epistemology is the branch of philosophy that examines the means and method by which human beings gain knowledge. The fundamental question of epistemology is how do men gain and verify knowledge? Here religion emphasizes faith. In contrast to reason, the method of secular philosophy and science, which starts with direct observation of facts and then seeks to formulate non-contradictory theories to explain the facts, faith starts with a book, whether the Bible, the Quran, or another, which is said to be written by men divinely inspired, whose teachings must be uncritically accepted. The most important knowledge or truths of human life are faith-based beliefs gleaned from a revealed text, truths insusceptible to observation or to logical criticisms grounded in observation. Jesus says, for example, quote, "Truly I tell you, if you have faith as small as a mustard seed, you can say to this mountain, move from here to there, and it will move. Nothing will be impossible to you." Unquote. If the Holy Book states that the universe was created from nothing, or that virgins give birth, or that a sheer act of belief can move a mountain, or the like, This claim is to be accepted regardless of its logical impossibility. Faith is belief in that for which there is no evidence, or more, which contradicts the evidence. As Mark Twain famously observed, faith is when you believe something you know ain't true. Now, ethics or morality is the branch of philosophy concerned with the issues of right and wrong. Religion commands unquestioning obedience to the Creator. Because God is the creator of the world and of man, his creation is his, and he governs it. This is why the first commandment of the Bible states, I am the Lord thy God, thou shalt have no other gods before me. In effect, this is the only commandment. For it proclaims that good and evil, or whatever God says they are, that men must place him and his decrees first in their pantheon of values, and that the fundamental virtue is obedience. How do we know that the Bible's commandments are morally right? By means of faith, the epistemological method of religion. What does all of this imply for the realm of politics? Notice that historically, where and whenever religion has been a dominant philosophic cultural force, a theocratic state has followed, whether under the medieval church, the Puritans, or the Ayatollahs, or elsewhere. The philosophic cause is clear. To religionists, for man's law to be virtuous, it must be in strict accordance with God's law. Who best knows God's law? The clergy or theologians who devote their life to it. Therefore, strict adherence to religion requires that a spiritual elite govern the state. A quote from a 20th century philosopher I don't generally quote from is Bertrand Russell, but in this case I think he's right. Quote from Why I Am Not a Christian. As soon as absolute truth is supposed to be contained in the sayings of a certain man, whether Moses, Jesus, Muhammad, or another, there is a body of experts to interpret his sayings, and these experts infallibly acquire power since they hold the key to truth. It is their business to expound an unchanging truth, revealed once for all in utter perfection, so that they become necessarily opponents of all intellectual and moral progress. Unquote from Russell's Why I Am Not a Christian. In summary, religion's answer to life's fundamental questions are as follows. What is the nature of the universe? It is created and governed by God and consists of two dimensions, the natural and the supernatural, the latter creating and governing the former. What is the nature of man? He is a dualistic being, part spirit, part flesh, part godly, part sinful, part good, part evil, a being torn by incessant soul-body conflict. How do men gain knowledge? They do so by means of faith in the truth of God's word as presented in Holy Scripture. What is the good? Strict obedience to God's word. What is the good society? One in which the principles espoused by the expert interpreters of God's commandments. Religion is a subcategory of philosophy, which is its genus. It is a faith-based, obedience-oriented system of belief. Now, this analysis leads to a rough working definition of religion. This is my definition, not Webster's. Religion is a philosophic system based in faith, upholding the existence of a God who requires blind obedience from the subjects he created and governs. Religion, without a doubt, is a philosophic system. Philosophy is the genus. Religion is a subcategory. Religion is faith-based philosophy in contrast to reason-based philosophy. This is the essence of religion. But what are the requirements of human life on earth? The requirements of human life on earth. Prior to the Industrial Revolution of 18th century Britain, famine in Europe and around the world was pervasive. Untreatable disease, as the aforementioned Black Death, was widespread. Utter destitution, rampant. And life expectancy was less than 35 years at birth in Great Britain in the 18th century. But the scientific, technological, and industrial revolutions definitively changed all that. Advances in theoretical science, applied science, and consequent industrialization and the mass production of consumer goods made possible extraordinary improvements in living standards and life expectancies. For example, an infant girl in the West today has a life expectancy of roughly 80 years, with standards of living undreamed of by her ancestors merely 2 centuries ago. Also during the 18th century, Intellectual and political revolutionaries in Great Britain's North American colonies established the freest nation of history. Such giants as Benjamin Franklin, George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, and others founded the American Republic on individuals' inalienable right to his own life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. This principle enabled citizens of the new republic to act fully in accordance with their basic means of survival, their reasoning minds. Over the past 220 years, the principle of individual rights established by the American Revolution has liberated the brain power of hundreds of millions of individuals. It has given rise to extraordinary advances in every field of intellectual endeavor, including such pioneering achievements as Thomas Edison's electric light, the Wright brothers' airplane, Henry Ford's mass production of automobiles, William James trailblazing the field of cognitive psychology, the literary works of Hawthorne, Poe, Melville, Twain, and others, the birth of the mass publishing, music, and film industries, the computer and internet revolutions, and on and on. Fundamentally, there are three principles mankind must recognize and embrace if human beings are to flourish on Earth. The first is that reason is man's basic means of survival. The second is that the requirements of man's life constitute the proper standard of moral value, the criterion by which good and evil are measured. And the third is that each individual should strive to attain his own life-serving values and personal happiness. Take them one at a time. Reason is man's basic tool of survival. Reason is man's sole means of understanding reality and his basic means of living on Earth. Every species possesses a distinctive means of survival. For example, birds have wings with which to fly, lions have claws and fangs with which to rend their prey, antelopes foot speed to outrun the lions, and so forth. Whereas other species survive by physicalistic means, wings, size, strength, claws and fangs, speed of foot, etc., man does not. If man tried to compete for survival by such means, his life expectancy would be sadly abridged. Let's see by a show of hands, how many people here would like to try outrunning a hungry lion? So it doesn't sound like a picnic, does it? It is not great foot speed or size or strength that enables human beings to survive, but reason. Every value upon which human life depends is a product of his reasoning mind. For example, men must grow food, which process requires knowledge of agricultural science and technology, which depends on the mind. They must develop medicines, a process entailing knowledge of biological science, which depends on the mind. They must build homes, a productive activity involving knowledge of architecture, engineering, and mathematics, which again depends on the mind. The monumental advances of the scientific, technological, and industrial revolutions are exalted examples of this principle. Reason is man's basic instrument of survival. What follows from that, then, is that any rejection of reason for any alternative is a rejection of man's survival instrument. That's a critical point. I'll repeat that. Any rejection of reason for any alternative is a rejection of man's survival instrument. And in that case, men cannot survive, and they will not. This means that reason is the basic means by which human beings promote their lives is clear. But the question remains, why is the enhancement of human life good? Or more generally, what makes anything good? Whether education, wealth, love, or anything else. Man's life is the standard of moral value. The question of what makes something good or bad has puzzled philosophers for centuries. For example, if it was said that an individual should work hard and support himself by honest effort, most people would undoubtedly agree. But what makes it good? Is it good because God commands it? Or good because society deems it so? Or good because an individual judges it right for himself? Or, alternatively, is there some fundamental fact of reality that requires it of human beings? Some fundamental fact of reality that mandates it as a necessity of human life? Now, Ayn Rand answered this question. She identified, after 2,500 years of Western philosophy, a rational, fact-based standard of moral value. Prior to Rand, philosophers had generally repudiated the idea that values could be based on or derived from facts. For example, the famous Scottish philosopher David Hume asked the question whether an ought proposition can be derived from an is proposition. An answer with a resounding no. Hume held in effect that while he could observe an individual working long hours, earning money, paying bills, devising a budget, putting money in the bank, and so forth, he could not discern the good in this. Where is the good? He asked. One cannot directly observe it, can't see the good, can't touch it, can't taste it. If there's no observational evidence to establish some action is good, then the good is not based in facts. Hume concluded that no identifiable positive relationship exists between values and facts. Value judgments are not based in the facts of reality, but in some other consideration. Now, this has been a popular theory over the ages. There's basically three schools of thought. One is that the good comes from God's commandments and that people must obey God. This is the religious school. A second is that the good varies from society to society. It's a social creation, and consequently someone must obey the state. And the third, we can think of as the hippie approach to moral philosophy, is the idea that if it feels good, do it. That an individual decides. That would be my favorite if those were the only three. But that an individual decides for himself or herself what's right or wrong, for himself. So basically, throughout history, notice there's no evidence of it. Here's God's will or society's command or individual's personal preference. Basically, the alternatives offered mankind are we have to obey God's whim or society's whim or my own whims. And that's really the sole alternative. There's no factual evidence offered to support any of these conclusions. Now, it remained for Ayn Rand in her novel Atlas Shrugged and in her non-fiction book The Virtue of Selfishness to demonstrate that objective facts, not subjective whims, form the basis of moral judgment. Now, Rand provided a revolutionary approach to the ought-is question. She rejected the premise that values are grounded in mere desires of the subject, whether the subject is a divine subject or a social, collective subject or a personal subject. And she asked the question, rather, what is the fundamental fact of reality that gives rise to the entire phenomenon of value? In other words, she's looking to the object, not to the subject. She's looking out to nature, to the objective world, and raises the question, what is the fundamental fact of reality that gives rise to the entire phenomenon of value? Now, once the question is posed in this innovative manner, it points in the direction of its answer. It is only because living beings must attain certain ends in order to sustain their lives that the phenomenon of valuing arises. A living being's values are those things that its nature requires for its survival. An organism's nature is not a matter of whim, but is a matter of hard, observable fact. Observe the causal connection between an organism's life and its values. A plant, for example, must gain the water, sunlight, and chemical nutrients that its life requires, without which it will die. Similarly, an animal must find the food and shelter from the elements upon which its life depends. If it fails, it perishes. In the same way, a man must produce the material necessities of his survival, a creative activity requiring the use of reason. For man as well, the alternative is starve, attain specific goals, or perish. In every case, an organism's nature, the factual requirements of its survival, is the source of its values. In no case is valuing a product of whim or caprice. This insight, that the factual necessities of life are the source and origin of valuing, is the indispensable identification that serves as the foundation of a rational ethics. If a being's life is the source and goal of valuing, then man's life, the life proper to a rational being, must be the standard of moral value. As Ayn Rand states, quote, "That which is proper to the life of a rational being is the good. That which negates, opposes, or destroys it is the evil. If the concepts of good and evil arise only because certain courses of action promote man's life and others harm or destroy it, then the good is that which benefits human life, and the evil is that which is inimical to it." Quote, "The validation of value judgments is to be achieved by reference to the facts of reality," writes Ayn Rand. "The fact that a living entity is determines what it ought to do." The fact that a living entity is, and is what it is, determines what it ought to do. The individual is the proper beneficiary of his actions. This leads to the third moral principle. If values come into existence only because certain things are necessary to sustain life, then who or what should achieve them? Who should be the beneficiary of values? Both historically and logically, there are but two choices. An individual can achieve values for himself, or he can sacrifice them and provide selfless service to society, or both. The code of self-interest is known as egoism. The code of self-sacrifice is called altruism. Historically, altruism has been the dominant code, whether men have been called upon to sacrifice for God or the state. Rand's validation of egoism is clear. If values must be gained to support life, then the question follows, who is alive? Who must act to gain and keep values? Whose life is at stake? Only individual organisms are alive. Societies or groups are not alive, not in any literal sense. Only the individuals who compose them are. Fundamentally, only individuals can or must pursue values because only they need values to sustain their lives. This is true of all values, including individuals' most basic biological processes. Howard Roark, in The Fountainhead, puts this plainly, quote, "We can divide a meal among many men. We cannot digest it in a collective stomach. No man..." I realized there was not much comedy in The Fountainhead. Actually, there is, but in different places. "No man can use his lungs to breathe for another man. No man can use his brain to think for another. All the functions of body and spirit are private," unquote. Just as there is no collective stomach to digest food, so there is no collective organism to achieve values. The Borg is merely a fantasy. You guys remember the Borg? Yeah. Star Trek? "You shall be assimilated," right? "Resistance is futile." Only individuals are alive in a literal biological sense. Only individuals need to gain values to sustain their lives. Only individuals will perish if they do not obtain the values their survival requires. All human cooperative effort is between and among individuals. An individual's need to achieve values is based logically in the factual requirements of human life, the objective phenomenon that makes both possible and necessary the whole field of morality. The validation of egoism is like all these people moving around. This is like giving a lecture in Grand Central Station, you know? All right. We soldier on. The validation of egoism involves this identification. Life requires the attainment of values, not their sacrifice. If you understand that, that's the whole argument for egoism. Life requires the attainment of values, not their sacrifice. To pursue values is to seek life. To relinquish or sacrifice them is to court death. Life requires egoism. Death is the result of altruism. Altruism calls specifically for the sacrifice of one's values. And it must not be confused with kindness toward others. Goodwill towards people one cares about, or at least has no reason to hold in contempt, is properly an important value for a rational man. For example, one can receive great joy from helping one's child, spouse, family member, or dear friend. One can even receive joy from helping a stranger. Conversely, where is the goodwill toward an individual called upon to sacrifice his values, whether his education, his career, his wealth, his love, his life? There is no goodwill in demanding or even requesting that a person sacrifice himself. Genuine caring for others resides in encouraging them to spread their wings and fly, exhorting them to achieve their values and prosper, urging them to live rationally, productively, egoistically. Speaking of Star Trek, what's the old Vulcan salutation? You guys remember? Live long and prosper. Now that's egoism. Live long and prosper. They didn't say sacrifice yourself and die young. That's not a benevolent salutation. Millions of loving parents understand this, at least implicitly, and rear their children with such a common sense form of egoism, taking great joy in their child's achievements and prosperity. Put simply, non-sacrificially helping others, helping those who are good people and about whom one genuinely cares, is good. Non-sacrificially helping others is good. Sacrificing the self is bad. Sacrificing the self, doing things that in any way harm one's life, is evil. Now, Ayn Rand asked and answered the fundamental questions of moral philosophy. The fundamental question of moral philosophy: what are values? They are those ends or goals that, given an organism's nature, objectively promote its life. Based on this revolutionary insight, she proceeded to ask and answer the three further questions of moral philosophy. 1. What is the standard of moral value? The factual requirements of human life. 2. By what means are men to attain values? By means of reason. 3. Who or what should fundamentally benefit from values? The individual acting in pursuit of them. These three principles, life as the standard of moral value, reason as man's basic means of living, and the individual as the proper beneficiary of his own actions, constitute the ethical code of life. These are the three principles that men must understand and adopt if they seek to live and prosper. They seek to live long and prosper. Where does religion stand on these life-giving principles? Tragically for mankind, it inexorably opposes every one of them. The irreconcilability of human life and religion. Religion subordinates reason to faith. It morally requires and often physically coerces people to accept the precepts of a revealed text, whether it's the Pope silencing Abelard, or the Inquisition suppressing Galileo, or the fundamentalists banning Darwin, or the jihadists murdering anyone who criticizes Islam, or one of 1,000 other instances. Religion forbids men from asking questions regarding the fundamental issues of human life. It quashes the free-thinking mind. It calls for the burning of books. It doesn't just call for it, it does it. It severely retards education, and it throttles progress. Whenever it's philosophically and culturally dominant, it throttles progress in philosophy, the arts, sciences, medicine, and technology. For example, in regard to just one of these vital fields, education, observe that throughout most of the Middle Ages, a period spanning virtually a millennium, the overwhelming majority of the Western European population, under the aegis of the Catholic Church, was fully illiterate. In some contemporary Islamic countries, girls are not taught to read, and the Taliban will put a bullet in a woman's head or throw acid in a girl's face for the crime of seeking an education. Now, look at the symbolism there. I mean, aside from the death-dealing lethality of it, they don't put a bullet in the woman's heart. They put it in her brain. The symbolism. It's perfect. They know their enemy. The educated, thinking, independent mind. They know their enemy. Reason, said Martin Luther in an immortal line, is the devil's harlot. Religion holds an alleged God's will, not the requirements of man's earthly existence, as its standard of moral value. Whatever God wills, whether beneficial or inimical to human life, is the good. If he forbids eating fruit of the tree of moral knowledge, thereby condemning man to ethical ignorance, that's good. If he says human beings are to be judged for their thoughts and desires, not just their actions, then judging men accordingly is a moral imperative. Thus emerges the grim spectacle of a man condemned solely for desiring to sleep with a married woman, even though, as a matter of moral principle, he steadfastly refuses to act on that desire. Further, if God slays thousands of human beings for worshiping a golden calf instead of him, in violation of a commandment not yet received, then this is good simply because he wills it. God's will be done. Or alternatively, Allahu Akbar. God is great. Bila Kaifa, without inquiring how, as Islam states. It has often been observed how much brutality is perpetrated in the name of God. This is the reason. If God's will is primary, the human life is secondary. If Old Testament Jews or Christian crusaders or Islamic jihadists or any other religious sect believe that God speaks to them and tells them to kill the infidel, like Ayatollah Khomeini in recent years, then the believers will regard aggressive slaughter of human life as morally upright. The fundamental principle is this: when man's life is subordinated to any consideration, an alleged God's will or another, then human beings will be sacrificed to the ruling concern, and men will die in hordes. Egoism, the moral code exhorting an individual's rational quest for values, is anathema to religion, because on a God-based ethics, virtue is achieved by means of selfless service, blind obedience to the deity. For example, God required Abraham's willingness to sacrifice his beloved child. In addition to demanding self-sacrificial actions, religion condemns countless actions that are or can be rationally self-interested, such as charging interest on loaned money, drinking alcohol, even in moderation, making love out of wedlock, and other horrible sins. All major religions regard sexual love in particular, perhaps the greatest joy in human life, as carnal, base, ignoble. To discourage it, Islam requires women to be covered from head to toe, permitting only their eyes to appear, and sometimes not even that. Women's eyes are dangerous, we know this. Orthodox Judaism stipulates for women extreme modesty of dress, enforced by berating those considered immodest. It bans a woman during menstruation from all sexual contact with her husband and requires ritual purification before contact resumes. The Puritans prohibited dancing. Medieval Catholics invented the chastity belt, the only invention I know of that comes out of religion. Yeah, that's fun. Religions in general regard males as hopeless, lust-dominated creatures, hold that females must be guardians of virginity, and condemn women as promiscuous sluts if they are not. It is impossible to calculate how many women have been riddled with guilt because they enjoyed lovemaking and have been robbed of a healthy sexuality because they had drummed into their heads since childhood that nice girls don't like sex. Religion enjoins human beings to renounce sexual pleasure and countless other values in sacrificial obedience to an alleged God. Now, not all religions call for all of the above policies, but religion insists on the existence of a supernatural realm, on its moral superiority to the natural one, on the subordination of reason to faith, and on blind obedience to an illusory being. Given such a primitive, indeed psychopathologic philosophy, any atrocity is justifiable. Religion's atrocious history is grim testament to this truth. Religion opposes every moral principle required by man's life on earth. It upholds faith over reason, God's will as the standard of moral value over the factual requirements of earthly life, and the sacrifice of one's values over the pursuit of them. Because of the fundamentals of religion's approach to moral philosophy, wherever and whenever it is adopted, it does and must lead to hell on earth. Many good people pay lip service to religion, but are in fact of mixed spirituality. By analogy, the United States has a mixed political system, a combination of individualism and collectivism, of capitalism and socialism, of freedom and statism. The freer capitalist elements lead to achievements and prosperity. The controlled status elements to suppression and stagnation. Similarly, many so-called religious people have a mixed intellectual system, a combination of rational self-interested policies and religious self-sacrificial ones. Such individuals, for example, go to medical doctors, not faith healers, read a variety of books, not merely the Bible, drink alcohol in moderation, enjoy sex with partners they love, even out of wedlock, recognize the truth of evolution, and so on. Many so-called religious people have an attenuated commitment to religion. They view religious obligation essentially as love God and be kind to your fellow man. That's it. They do not reject reason in most of their life of faith, do not hold that this life is but a testing ground for a better one to come, do not despise man as a sinful being, do not uphold an ethics of self-sacrifice, do not condemn pursuit of this worldly values and personal happiness, do not believe that infidels should be forcibly converted or killed, indeed do not even employ the term infidel in their vocabulary and probably don't even know what it means. In people of mixed spirituality, the rational secular values lead to success and happiness. The faith-based religious ones to failure and misery. On this point, observe the vivid difference in outcome between the predominantly rational religious person who takes his diabetic child to a physician and the completely religious person who takes his sick child to a faith healer. It is long past time for Americans and Westerners in general to repudiate the irrational part of the mixture and to fully embrace the rational part. If they do so, they will find that their own lives and the conditions of their countries will immensely improve. Thank you.